Welcome to the Omen Comics podcast, where we talk about everything from writing comics to the philosophies held within them. My name is Michael Nunneley, the creator of the Omenverse, and with me, as always, is my friend Steve Sellers, the creator of the Blitzverse. Today, we're talking about writing comics in the Omen Way. What makes writing comics different for the Omen crew as opposed to writing comics for others?
Well, when we start looking at the way we do things at Omen, we have a certain structure that we've learned to develop over time, and we also have um, certain rules that we've kind of established for ourselves. Some of it's narratively, and some of it is just the process that we go by to do this. And one of the things that we always want to keep in mind is that to a certain extent, we're kind of trying to show, in a way, a film through the pages and the way we lay them out. Okay. And the way we sort of do this is we want to keep in mind that every panel is a snapshot of time. And when we link panels together, the idea is that they're moving pictures in a sense. The idea that when you flip a lot of different related pictures together, they form a story. So we want to kind of keep those principles in mind. There are others, of course, that Michael lays down for himself and for Omen, but that's kind of the basic structure.
So
Now,
kind of a keeping sequential art actually sequential is
yeah,
key part.
pretty much exactly, yeah. So the idea being that everything should be sequential and that the sequences form a smooth, clear film. You know, or the film. It may not be the film we necessarily have in our head, but that's the goal. But the thing also to keep in mind is that this is not meant to be prescriptive. We are not trying to tell you this is how you have to write comics and this is the only way to write comics. No,
Thus saith the God of comics.
not at all, not at all. I'm not even sure that Alan Moore would do it that way. But the idea really is that we've developed kind of our own process that works for us and for the Omenverse. And so the idea really is like if you're going to create your own comic, or if you're going to create your own company, or however you want to do this, the idea is to find the rules that work for you. And so we're just kind of sharing the process behind that, how we do that.
Right. We're definitely not trying to lay down some rigid rules of this is the formula for success, or this is how you must do these things. Part of our situation is situational, part of it is stylistic, but either way it's unique to how we do it. We just hope that perhaps this process might be inspiring.
Right. And so the idea is we want to be able to find the process that works for us, and also that works for the story that we're trying to tell, so that you can look at these pages and that you can get the experience that that we hope that you'll be able to enjoy and appreciate.
Totally. So what are some of the things that you do to make your stories cinematic?
Okay. Well, the thing really is that now you may very well be one of those people that are not the type to necessarily think in pictures. If you're one of those people that thinks in pictures, I love you because I can't do that. So I have to, in my head, find ways to turn what I see in my head into a series of pictures. One of the things that I did was I took Neil Gaiman's masterclass recently, and one of the things that he did was he outlined the Midsummer Night's Dream issue of Sandman, and he showed how he broke that down. And one of the ways that he did this was he would use essentially a beat sheet where he would loosely describe what's on each page. So, and then from that kind of extrapolate how the panels are laid out, what needs to be in each page, what sequences need to be shown.
So like a page breakdown to tell you which way you're going.
Right.
Okay.
So, so that kind of helps because it kind of helps you avoid putting too much on each page, which is a problem that I sometimes have. Like, I'm sure Michael can swear to all the times when he's had to look at pages and say, yeah, this is too much on one page. We need to break it up. So this is one of the ways that I try to do to avoid that problem. And another
If
thing,
it makes you feel any better, Steve, I have issues with trying to get stuff on a page that I want to fill it full of 5,000 details too.
yes. Oh yeah. 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 Because we always have like too much story in our head, and we do want to put as much on the page as possible. But the thing is that the page itself is limited, and you have to think about what's important to show, and in what order, and how much room you have on the page. So you have to learn to kind of manage that. And the beat sheet is like a good rule of thumb. If that's something you struggle with. In terms of other things that I do, one thing that I think is really good is to try to have references. And I'm not necessarily saying like you have to do like deep, involved research on every single thing that you show in the page, but if you
Although
want
I
to
do.
like get a, yeah, the idea is just a flavor of authenticity.
Right.
Okay. To give it enough window dressing where it looks real and you can describe it to your artist, and they can kind of take that. Now, with the way we do it, and for reasons we'll get into, I have to describe things in a way where anybody can theoretically look at the script and say, okay, I know what he's trying to say. This is what I have to draw. So the idea is, okay, I need to get references where I can clearly describe these things, in a way that's accessible to, anybody off the street, in, wherever they are or whenever they are. Now, some things do involve a lot of deep research. Guardians of the Lamb is one of those where I had to do a lot of that. You'll see the result of that, hopefully, in coming issues, but uh, really a lot of that was being able to describe, you know, certain historical landmarks, certain places like Herod's Palace that does play into that issue, things like that. In terms of what you may have already seen, with White Druid and Michael Nero #1, one thing I did that with was with Lou's manor house in Ireland, where I just went and looked at a bunch of manor houses, and I tried to find one that looked like the one that Lou might live in. And I kind of used that as sort of a loose basis to describe the manor for Hawashika, who drew that issue. So
And
this is kind of the process that we go through.
that was I just got to say that was a well chosen house too. I can still picture the big crackoom
Yeah,
across the top of it with the lightning flashing and the wind blowing.
yeah.
Hawashika did very good on that one.
Oh yeah, he was great. It looks very much like what I picked out.
Right on, right on. Yeah, I think writing cinematically is definitely something that is different from the average. Like for instance, writing novels or even having to write out a comic script for another person. We not only have to be we have to be detailed, yes, but we have to describe things visually in such a way that we act as the set dresser, the costume designer, the producer, the director, the writer of a film. We're like playing all these different parts where other people actually put it together, but like we have to write the instructions for everyone to do that. That's definitely something different than how the average comic book writer needs to do a script. And I think part of that uh, deals with it having to be done for other people that are in other countries. Our artist is in Nigeria, and our letterer is in Argentina, So we have to be very specific when we're talking to them, like you're talking about before. You mentioned that it has to be in a way that anyone looking at it can see what it is that we're trying to say and what it is that we want. That it's not, I've read a lot of other scripts where uh, the people will be very generic in their panel descriptions. Like, a guy does this. Well, in Omen Comics, that's not how it works. You got to describe what that guy looks like and what exactly he's doing and where he's doing it at and what happens when he does it. And it, it it's a whole different, like we're filming a scene almost in each panel.
Yeah, and we tend to be very, very much more detailed than a lot of other publishers that you're going to find. I mean, I've looked through so many different scripts, like as I was trying to like develop the style for writing comics, and the way we do it is a lot more challenging, but it's also a lot more worthwhile, once we get it done.
Right. I think it definitely turns out well, and it feels fluid when we're done. You don't have those pages where you read one or two panels that feel sequential, and
Mhm.
then the next two or three feel like you missed three or four panels and you just kind of skipped a whole second. Like this,
Yeah.
by the way, this is 5 minutes later, kind of a thing. And I like how having to focus on that detail and having to work on that fluidity makes that feel so much more smooth. It really has that film on paper.
Yeah. And a lot of it is just kind of keeping in mind that just because you have it playing out a certain way in your head doesn't mean that it's necessarily playing that way the way you've written it on the page.
Ah,
You really need to kind of go through and kind of make sure that's as fluid as you can describe it. Now, you never know what's going to happen once the script moves out of your hands, but you want to take as much ownership of that as possible, at least in terms of the Omen process.
I learned a lot of that with Omen number one, actually.
Mm,
That I had that issue playing out a little bit differently in my head,
hmm
where it was more there were scenes like when Frank grabs Fassbender and they go over the rails so he can save his men.
hmm
I had that whole sequence going much more smooth, and it had it had a different panel layout than I had described, and there are logistical things that even with all of the detail and vividry I put into the image itself,
hmm
that there's the fact that once you hand it off, like you're saying, to another person, to the artist, some of that is going to be lost in translation.
Right, because it always is.
It's unfortunate, honestly. But there's no way around it. Making comics is a group effort.
Right.
There isn't any way around that. You're not you do your small part, but then that small part gets taken up by other people, and they then put their parts in it, and no one person makes a comic.
Yeah. Unless you're Frank Miller or something.
Well, right, but even Frank Miller might have. I don't. Did he do his own lettering and stuff too?
I don't know about that. I think now that I think about it, I think John Byrne did. But yeah, Miller, I don't remember. I think a lot of the stuff that he did was Lynn Varley.
Right. I found with our letterer Guido Martinez. He will do things with lettering by choosing a particular font or choosing a particular size or using some kind of animation in how something is said, and it really affects the feel and the flow of the story and in the lettering. And then there's the editor, of course. Has to your favorite person, by the way,
Oh,
has to go
he keeps
over.
me honest.
Yes, he does it to me too. I both hate and love him for that. But yeah, you definitely have to focus on fluidity. You definitely have to focus on detail, and not just detail, but details about details.
Mhm.
Omen Comics is writing Omen Comics is going to be much different than any other comic that you might write for, because
Mhm.
we can't just call up our artist in Ibadan, Nigeria, and chat with them about how we feel like a panel should go or a page should flow or anything.
Mhm.
It's limited to social media.
And that has its limitations too.
It does, but I think that I think that fairly covers the basics of what goes into writing Omen Comics. We try to make as Steve pointed out, the sequential art actually has to be sequential. When you're writing, when you're watching a movie, unless it's like a dramatic effect, like you're seeing it in a strobe light or something, you don't see choppy movement scenes. You don't see bits of dialogue that aren't necessarily connected to the next bit. It all has to flow and make sense, and it has to connect and link together.
Yeah. It needs to not throw the reader out of the experience, and we're kind of hoping that so far that we've succeeded with that.
Right. That was a big one for me when we used to review comics, was
Mhm.
when even if the story was really basic, there wasn't a whole lot of depth to it or anything like that.
Mhm.
If I could get into the world and
Mhm.
stay in the world from the beginning of the comic to the end of the comic, I looked at it as a successful writing venture.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, there's some artists that have really done it well in contrast, and so you really want to prize the people that really know how to tell the story visually.
For sure, for sure. Who would you say have been your bigger influences as far as how have you how you have adapted to writing in my sandbox, as it were?
Well, I don't know that there was a particular writer. I think it was more a process of, okay, this is the world that I'm dealing with, and so I have to kind of adjust to that. But in terms of like how I look at, Druid and Nero, I would certainly kind of look to Stephen Moffat, who did Sherlock and Doctor Who. There is a little bit of that. One of probably my biggest writing influence period is Chris Claremont, but I think that's more evident, I think, on Guardians, which is more of a team-oriented series.
Right.
Um, yeah, and with and a lot of what's I would also say like Todd McFarlane with Spawn, like especially like the early issues. I feel like in terms of like establishing tone, he was really good at doing that, and he really knew what good writing was and how to make that work, even if like a lot of his panels were overwritten at times. But he knew how visually to make a story move, and he knew how to establish the kind of dark, spooky tone that the Omenverse has. So that I sometimes kind of think about the way he did it.
Right. I definitely had a lot of influence in Claremont, but more as how he did things as a in his career. How he would plant little bits of he would start these little storylines
Mm-hmm.
in comics, and sometimes it would be years before he would get around to resolving them.
Sometimes it would be years before he remembered that he had them there.
Yes, yes, that too. And I like to write in that fashion. I wanna write in a way that you can read my comic, 50 times over the next several years and have just as many experiences reading it.
Yeah, I think for me, the thing with Claremont that really sticks is the characterization. Like the X-Men were not just like these characters that walked on, did their bit and went off. They became very believable, lifelike people with a lot of moral complexity. So Wolverine would kind of start off a certain way, and then he would gradually change and grow over the course of the stories, and he would have a lot more soul to him, and he would be almost a different person towards the end that he was at the beginning. And that's another thing where I'm kind of hoping that we're aiming towards.
Like you like to see the growth of a character
Oh
throughout
yeah, yeah,
time.
oh, yeah.
Definitely. I think another one of my influences got to be Scott Snyder.
Mm. Yeah,
Uh,
he's done some good stuff.
well, particularly his run on Batman.
Mm. The
Um,
the world building in that run, I'm very impressed by.
right, right. I liked how he handled. It was he managed to go from little mini story to mini story, but it felt like one fluid thing.
Mhm.
Like it was just a natural progression to move on to this next portion.
Yeah. And it wasn't just the story of, Bruce as a character. It was the story of Gotham City and how it had changed over time and what Bruce's place in it was. And I thought that was an interesting way of approaching it.
Right? That kind of inspired me to do what I've done in building the character of Kingdom City.
Hmm.
In that, there are different parts of town. There
Hmm.
are these town parts of town have histories and social classes and stuff. There's,
Right.
we even have we have an established scene of punk and metal bands in Kingdom
Hmm.
City. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? Like there,
Child of Fear.
yeah, we definitely put character into the city, and Scott Snyder was a big Scott Snyder doing that with Gotham City was a big inspiration for that for me.
Yeah. Yeah, for me, I think in terms of that, it was Kurt Busiek's Astro City. And actually, that was a big influence on Blitz for Revelation, which we'll talk about another time. But I like the way that Busiek built like each district. I like the way that a lot of it was the history of Astro City. It wasn't but just about like the Superman character or Winged Victory or any of these other people per se. They're just a small slice of the history of that city. But ultimately, it was the character of the city itself that kind of dominates over it. That's really what it's about. Like, the whole community of heroes that exists in the city. And I really like the way that he did that.
I would say I had the exact same experience with Sin City.
Yeah, that's another really great one.
That like just how you described that there, how each character in there was just this slice of this bigger character of the city.
Hmm. Yeah, the fact that it was called Basin City and that changed.
Right.
I mean, just little touches like that.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, I think we pretty much covered how to write comics the Omen way. What do you think?
I think we've given people a pretty thorough look into our process and how we do things here.
Right on, right on. Well, I hope you guys found this to be entertaining and hopefully inspiring. Let us know if this did anything for you. If this gave you any ideas about how you might like to write, and let us know how you yourself write. We'd like to hear about it.
Yeah, same here.
Have a good one, guys.
Thank you for listening to the Omen Comics podcast. This has been Steve Sellers and Michael Nunneley here with Omen Comics. And we encourage you to look into all our Omenverse titles, wherever they might be sold, including Comixology, Amazon, Draw Me in Comics, and elsewhere. If you like our content, please like, subscribe, hit the magic bell for notifications. And until next time, we'll see you in the Omenverse.